All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Clarke, and I'm a principal architect here with AdvizeX out of our Cleveland office. And this morning, I have the privilege of talking to all of you about mobility access, device management, and digital workspace, and what that really means. And I'm super excited to get started this morning. So let's get straight into it. Just a tiny bit about myself before we get started. The four letters up there, the VCDX, what that really means is it stands for VMware Certified Design Expert. What that really means from my perspective is that I can understand business requirements and map them to meaningful uses of technologies for customers. It means, does what we're doing solve problems for people and businesses? Because if it doesn't, and we're doing technology for the sake of technology, we've lost sight of why we might be doing something. So just wanted to call that out, that's sort of, the architectural mindset that, we apply when we're going through things here and what we're looking at. And a little bit about myself, I was a desktop engineer in the past. So I've, worked with SCCM, traditional configuration management tools, mobile device management softwares, virtual desktop environments, all of that. So a lot of EUC focused in my past and history. So we're going to kick it off. And one of the things I like to start with is just a couple practical questions that are focused for you. And, you can just sort of answer these yourself as we sort of go along through them. But there's a good way of taking the pulse of saying, how are we really doing from an EUC perspective? The first one is, how long does it take you to get your applications to your users after they request them? In other words, when someone comes to the business and says, hey, I need a new version of the app that just dropped, it doesn't matter how that's delivered. How long does it take for you to get it to them? They want that new version of the application. How long does that take? How long does it take for your organization to get users completely onboarded from start to finish? And the way I usually phrase that is meaning usable employees. And when we look at a couple organizations that have gone through a transformation, they see massive decrease in usable employees on day one when they have an adoption of a digital workspace solution. How confident are you that your devices have corporate data on them, are encrypted, including personal devices? I always think this one's funny because I'll ask folks, well, are you using any cloud solutions? Are you using anything along those lines? And they'll say, no, we don't really use cloud. I'm like, so you're not using, you sent me an email that said from Office 365. Are you sure you're not using cloud solutions? Well, yeah, I mean, they use Office 365 right? So they can get access to email through a web page, right? So they can get it from a personal device. Well, yeah, technically. I'm like, so the question still stands. So how confident are you that devices that can access your corporate data are encrypted and your data is protected? How much time is spent, aka wasted, troubleshooting endpoint devices? And I like this question a whole lot because, we've seen where problems that come up from a desktop perspective are hugely impactful to anybody that needs to get work done that day. And it can sometimes take days to get them back up and running, especially if that, computer was their pet that they've had for the last 3 years and it goes down. Man, that is like, just a couple days worth of effort before they're usable again. This one is kind of a pointed question, and I really like it. How many proactive end user support tickets were open so far this year? And it's more of a little bit of a sideways comment of saying, this is what we should be aiming for. As EUC technicians, as IT organizations, we should be aiming for proactive support for our customers. And as a part of that, how would you potentially be proactive in your support of end users for their systems, for their devices? Well, you need to have insight into how well those devices are running. If you were going to call someone and say, hey, I see that your application that you use a lot has crashed 10 times today. Is there any way we can help with that? You would probably knock someone right out of their chair. But in order to do that, you would need information about how often it was happening and resources and time and availability to actually proactively reach out. So it's a lofty goal, but one that customers of mine are doing. I've gotten some dagger looks when I put this question up on the screen, which is, how flexible would you say your user community is on a scale of 1 to 10? And, some people end up knowing the answer to that question, which I think is just fun. How many of your tickets are related to login or password issues? And I've talked to a couple customers about this, and they start laughing in the middle of this slide, and they'll say, kind of like, what's funny? And they'll say, we know exactly the number, and it's a huge amount. Like oftentimes it's from 25 to 40% of all the tickets are related to login or password issues that a company is going to field. And the last question is really, what kind of insight do you have as to how well your applications are running across all your devices? Are you aware that an iOS application that you just released is crashing on a new version of iOS? Are you aware that the new build of Windows 1809 that just dropped is causing problems for a .NET application that you've deployed? What kind of insight do you have as to how well your applications are running and how often they might be crashing and how well they're performing? Now, this slide is one that pretty much everyone has seen has been, overused, and it's the landscape. For those of you who might have a small monitor here, it's the security landscape slide that goes through, all the different buckets of security. And I look at this slide, and it just kind of makes me, not feel well, just to be perfectly honest. And what this slide has done, basically, with this gigantic amount of security softwares that have crept up, is it's actually impacted the employee experience. They've gone to a point now where they've said, hey, because of all the policy that we're implementing, we're going to actually make it harder for you to log in because we have to protect the data, right? It's exactly what we're talking about. If you've got to make sure that data is protected, then you have to implement policies and controls to make sure that you can assert that, you are reasonably protecting your data. The only problem is sometimes it ends up feeling like this guy right here. Got my new corporate laptop, and this is my life now, and I'm just going to accept it, and I'm just going to embrace it, and this is just my life, and this is how I have to deal with it now. And this rings true with anybody that's ever worked at a company where there's been a lockdown computer that was handed to you, and especially folks that might be on this webinar are might be more technically savvy in nature, and to have someone say, hey, here's a computer, but you can't install anything on it, you can't do anything with it, you can't even open a command prompt, you can't do anything, like it's just very restrictive, and it feels like very restrictive. Now, why does this matter? Why is any of this even relevant? And the honest answer is the workforce is changing, and the reason this is relevant is not for the sake of technology, but for the sake of workforce. As we look at the next generation of folks that are coming up, what's known as the I generation, right? These are people that have been using digital devices since birth. And, what's really interesting about this generation is that nearly half of Gen Zers would say they would be most excited to apply for a job with a fun work environment and a flexible schedule. And this trumped PTO, promotion, and training. And to me, that's absolute, I kind of am a little bewildered by that. But, I get it. And it's just an interesting thing, because as the workforce landscape shifts, the question will be, as a business, how do you attract talent that your competition cannot? What makes it more, what makes you a more viable employer than perhaps one of your competitors for someone that has the same skill set that you require? And as we look at, this just across the board, there are clearly challenges from an end user computing perspective. We have to secure our data. We have to provide access. We got to try to be efficient. It takes a giant amount of effort to keep a stock of desktops imaged and ready to go, and phones for that matter. We have to ensure that desktop operating systems are patched. We have to allow for flexibility and endpoint choice. And then we just, for the most part, haven't had the ability to provide insight into what it takes to provide proactive end user support. And what we found is that in the end state with a digital workspace, we basically solve for all these conditions, where we can provide conditional single sign-on across the enterprise with multi-factor authentication. It helps us deliver a catalog of applications, regardless of what device you're using. It's going to customize that catalog for what apps can be either accessed or installed. It's going to provide us with access to device applications, meaning things that can be installed, as well as remote. It's going to give us better analytics and insight into those devices and how well things are running. It's going to help us with onboarding and offboarding. It's going to give us more usage, and it's going to empower your staff to feel like they can actually make choices about some things that they do. And this is where I typically end up going into what our AdvizeX solution architecture is for the digital workspace. And it starts with a very foundational premise. It starts with this idea that we've got devices, whether that's computers, phones, whatever, on one side, and hybrid infrastructure on the other. And that sort of builds upwards into saying that from an end user perspective, we've got local applications that are installed on it. We've got mobile devices. We've got laptops, desktops to worry about from an end user device perspective. And for the most part, there's some IoT stuff creeping in there, but for the most part, that's it. And then on the hybrid infrastructure side, we've got virtual desktops, hosted applications, and SaaS applications. And as we look at that, that's basically just saying, hey, we've got a number of different ways that we can actually present applications out. If you just need a web browser, you don't need to install a client to access Salesforce, right? For Salesforce, which is a SaaS application, you can just open a web browser and get straight to it. But there are some applications that require client components and that would need to be hosted either in a virtual desktop or a remote desktop server host. We unify the management of those endpoints on the right-hand side, and then we unify delivery of all these applications on the left-hand side. And then we tie it together with unified security, operations, and then we layer over the top our service management, which allows us to say we can have a definitive endpoint and request system for users that are looking for new applications. And I just wanted to take a quick second and go over just some key terms and tech leaders for digital workspace technologies, just in general. And so some of the key terms here, one of them is unified endpoint management. You may have heard us say that. In fact, VMware even has a product now called Workspace One UEM. And this is the idea that you have a single set of software that is securing and controlling desktops, laptops, smartphones in a connected, cohesive manner. And we can really blame Microsoft for this, because Microsoft, basically with Windows 10, started to say, we're going to treat this desktop operating system like a mobile operating system. Like, fun fact, did you know if you go in a control panel in Windows 10, you can actually reset your Windows computer back to factory defaults, just like an iPhone. You can just go in and reset it. And part of that is simply because of their approach to say, we need to simplify this. We need to get more modern with how we are managing these endpoints. We need to have enterprises that can embrace app stores or create their own effective app stores. And in order to do that, they have to make a shift in how they're managing those. From an IAM perspective, IAM is the discipline here that's going to ensure that the right individuals access the right stuff at the right time for the right reason. Do you have access to something? When, where, why? Federated identity management. What we like to think about here with federated identity management is it allows enterprises to basically talk to each other without sharing passwords, if that's a weird way of saying it. It allows people to basically, the way I describe federated identity management is oftentimes, I have a lot of kids, so I explain it like this. One of my kids will come to me and ask me for something, and I'll say, I don't know, go ask your mother. She's the authoritative source. And then if they come back and said, Mom said yes, I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I don't, I almost don't even need to know. As long as I trust what their mother is saying, then I don't necessarily need to hear the answer directly. I just need to hear that it was okay. So that's kind of like federated identity management. And then VDI is virtual desktop infrastructure, and this has been around for quite some time. Virtualization tech that basically connects folks to desktop operating systems or servers that are disguised to look like desktops. And as we look at the tech leaders, this is a little bit of an older one. This is from IDC 2016, just calling out that in the virtual client computing market, the VMware and Citrix are sort of the main two players there. And this is a little bit dated, but it's still fairly accurate today. As we look at just recently from June 2018, as we look at the unified endpoint management leaders, we see that it's kind of a two-horse race here at the top right with VMware and Microsoft. And those two products are Workspace One and Intune, and then IBM, Mobile Iron, and BlackBerry fall through from there. Who are the leaders in identity and access management? As we look at there, we'll notice we've got Okta, Microsoft, are way out front, and then IBM and Oracle are kind of hanging out below that, and that's true. And VMware doesn't have a solution in this space, and I think that's important to call it, and that's why they're not in this particular IAM segment. So now I wanted to take some time and go through what is UEM really, and what role does it play in the digital workspace. So as we look at traditional IT organizations, this is almost how it has always looked. The team for mobile folks that manages the Androids and iOS devices, and God help you if it was Windows CE on a mobile tablets from years ago, but those were things that there was typically a mobile team that managed those. There's a desktop team, oftentimes desktop engineering and desktop support. Sometimes that's one and the same, sometimes those are different. But the concept is that there's a team of folks that are managing Windows, and maybe some poor soul is even responsible for managing Macs on that team as well. And then from an LOB perspective, someone would be the Office 365 person. You know, there would be this gal is responsible for managing Salesforce, so this guy's responsible for Office 365, and that they would typically manage everything that's related to the access of those solutions. What that meant is then you had to go to 3 different teams to actually provision access or provision devices or provision applications to those devices. And when we look at breaking those silos, it allows us to sort of shift the paradigm a little bit and say, if we can provide context from the endpoint, in other words, the iOS device, the Mac, the Chromebook, whatever it is, if we can provide context on who's using that device, what the condition of that device is, how secure is it, has it been jailbroken, has it been rooted, is it running anti-malware software? These are all questions that, you know, may be asked. So that provides context over, you know, what the device actually, the state of the device is. And if we pair that with identity and then say who the person is, now we can make a really, really informed decision. And this is one of the huge value adds that we see in VMware Workspace One, is that they can actually make those identity and context-based decisions to say, now I know you normally have access to this application, but I see you haven't patched this computer in about 6 months. So because of that, we're going to actually force you to step up authentication and use multi-factor authentication as a result of that. And that's the kind of things that security teams love, because it helps to push some of those update processes down the line a little bit to say, hey, you know, it's basically like a contract between the employer and the employees that says we're going to work together to help keep our devices secure. And as a result of that, the employer can allow a little bit more flexibility in endpoint. So it's a trade-off, right? The employer gets compliance and security and the reporting and metrics that they need from that perspective. The employees get privacy and the experience of, you know, selection of whatever device that they would feel is best to meet their needs. So it's a really cool thing. And I just wanted to call it this infographic is really busy, and I'm sorry if you've got a small screen and you're looking at that, but you know, it really sort of highlights the fact that to get to what I'm talking about, it's not like you just install some software and then you're just magically there. It absolutely is a journey, because to say I'm going to change the way I'm delivering my applications to every device, I'm going to change the way that I'm entitling folks to access software, and then potentially I'm going to change the way that I manage Windows as a service or applications as a service. All of those together have huge capital and operational impacts. And to say that, like, you're just going to, you know, I really want to do digital workspace, so I'm going to make it happen tomorrow, poof, done. It doesn't really happen that way. More often than not, what we see is folks biting it off in phases and blocking and tackling specific efforts, you know, for a year. And at AdvizeX, we've gone through doing a lot of road mapping with customers to say, what is it going to take to get you to a seamless onboard? Or whatever the goal is that, you know, that they prioritize most, that's what we push forward and say, that's what we need to do. So just to walk through this, as you can see, we've got sort of the current situations top left, where we're saying, hey, there's shadow IT, there's, you know, there's password paralysis, there's budget concerns, there's all sorts of things. And the transition here with this sort of like circle slide in the middle is where we're actually going through and saying, we're changing from this concept of IT pushing to users pulling. And that, and the very thought that I don't have to necessarily pick up the phone to call IT to request a new application is absolutely mind-blowing for some folks. And to see that work, right, with single sign-on for application installs, for accessing desktops and applications, it's really very powerful. And once you get there, it's absolutely amazing. The folks that have achieved the vision, for example, a big software company, they went from actually having a week to onboard an employee to being usable to one of my first pulse-taking questions, down to a 1-hour manager-led session only. So there was no IT calling up and saying, hey, it's just you got your laptop, and there was no need for IT to connect in. They were literally just showing you how to use the applications and how to enter time and how to do things like that, instead of saying, oh, I got to get you added to the time system. I got to write down this piece of paper with 1,000 URLs on it and 1,000 passwords, and it just simplified the entire process. So as we look at it, Workspace One, the platform, really allows you to provide that consumer simple and enterprise secure platform to basically give a unified workspace experience and endpoint management across the board, and it's really very powerful. So when we ask ourselves, well, what are some of the 3 initiatives, right, that we might be looking for? I sort of hit on this already. We can simplify our app and access management. We can unify and modernize the way that we manage our endpoints. And how about this? Maybe even adopt the word endpoint instead of phones, tablets, Macs, Chromebooks. What if you could actually adopt the word endpoint and say, I actually don't care what you're connecting in from, as long as it's compliant with our policies? Food for thought there. And then the final one is to transform Windows delivery as a service. And this is an interesting one because if you know anything about me, I've done a lot of virtual desktop infrastructure projects in the past. And one of the things that we've talked about is how less important than picking a VDI platform or something like that is understanding your application delivery strategy and your platform strategy. In other words, your Windows strategy, if it's a Windows-based application. How are you going to provide that seamless Windows experience or that application running on Windows as a seamless experience to your end users? And that transformation, and all 3 of these are things where we've worked with customers to say, hey, which of these was most important to you? Which of these did you want to prioritize a little bit more and go forward from there? So the user experience, more often than not today, can be complex and siloed. Like we were talking before, there's a variety of applications. There's a bunch of different shortcuts and usernames and passwords. It seems that almost anybody I talk to is like, hey, where's your KeyPass or your Excel spreadsheet or your Excel IPAM or whatever you have that is set up out there, and it's just, a lot of it's just chaotic. And it's a real challenge to manage from an IT perspective. There's different app interfaces. There's a mobile app, but nobody uses it. So we all just log onto the computers, and it's just, there's just things all over the place. So creating a consumer simple and secure experience is absolutely something that we've done in the past with customers with Workspace One. What that really gives you is that gives you a single spot right here that sort of looks and feels great, and looks and feels the same across all the devices. And that's really important. As you're browsing through the catalog, you're actually seeing a catalog that is dynamically shape-shifting in the background to match the applications that you need to deploy on the device. For example, if you go to install a Concur app or like a Tripit or something like that on Windows, maybe they have an app, but probably not. More often than not, that's an Android or an iOS application. So in that case, you might see the Tripit or Concur applications pop up in the catalog here for you to download and install. And that's absolutely fantastic. And even if it's a paid application, you can actually have a subscription from the company in the background that's going to say, hey, we know that that's a paid application in a third-party app store, but we're going to provide it for you and actually, have that be billed back to the business for your use of that application. So when we look at the catalog, we're trying to paint the picture of the end user experience of thinking of how seamless it is for anybody that's an Apple user to download an app or to update their apps or to use a catalog and say, I just know right where I need to go. I go into the app store, I do my search, I find my app. I get the work done I need to get done. And so with this catalog, this is also that central gateway that allows you to simplify user access to the applications. And I sort of had, I have a little phrase that goes along with this. And more often than not, I get the question of, like, well, we've got a VPN, we've got this, Netscape with a web interface. We've got, a different VPN for a recent company that we did through a merger and acquisition. We've got all sorts of things all over the place. And the more I think about it, I'm like, it's just more doors that you have to manage to get in. And the phrase that I use is it's not Workspace one of many, it's Workspace One. And the value of that is that you're giving folks one place to go to get the applications they need to get the job done. And that is incredibly powerful. So as we look at Workspace One, and how the authentication actually carries out. Like we saw that there's remote apps, there's web apps, and there's native applications. From an authentication perspective, this is where we tie the device compliance and the context together. We say, hey, that device that I see over there, I noticed that we manage it, but it's also jailbroken. So that's a problem. Because of that, we're going to either adjust the slider from user authentication to say either how difficult should we make it for you to log in, or should we allow you access to any applications from that device? And that is a slider that we have worked with customers to adjust as a result of whatever the security posture and policy is. No company is the same when it comes to the policy and posture for security. Different companies have different, regulatory requirements that they need to meet. And as a result of that, we've worked with them to say, hey, this is where we feel, where is your gold? Where's your gold kept? And what do we have to make sure that you are really protecting? For example, if you have a web conferencing system, that's important, but it's not like mission critical. You would certainly have more leniency with access to a web conferencing system than you would to a production data warehouse, with financial data in it. So with that in mind, it's just saying that with the device compliance and with us understanding the status of the device, it allows us to basically pivot and make an intelligent decision every time the user logs in to do work and say, we understand where you're connecting from, what the status of the device is that you're connecting from, and the identity. And one of the great things about this is this might sound like it's invasive. And again, we talked about the handshake between IT and the users. There's actually a privacy application that comes with Workspace One that allows you to show people this is the policy, and it points back to Workspace One URLs live and says, this is actually what the policy is on your device. This is what we can and cannot see. We cannot see your GPS location. We cannot see this. We cannot see this. We can see this. Now, whatever policy is actually applied to that device is what will show up in the privacy app, which is very important because it's not just an app that just says, hey, we promise we're not reading text messages. No, it's actually looking at the policy that's applied to that device and live in real time showing it back to the user so that they can have a sense of confidence and privacy on the device they're using for both personal and work. So like we talked about with unified endpoint management, it's the new standard for PC management. We saw this as Gartner looked at it, right? And basically the two out front were VMware with Workspace One and Microsoft with Intune. And whether it's either one of those products, it's all predicated on the fact that Microsoft sort of went really forward by saying, we're going to manage Windows like a mobile operating system. And what that results in is really what do you care about when you're managing a fleet of desktops? And I can say this honestly because I did this. And yeah, it's a good user experience, I need to make sure that all my stuff is patched. I need to make sure that I have scalable software distribution. So in other words, that I can actually deliver applications without it being a giant pain. And as someone that managed a 100+ site SCCM environment, I can tell you that scalable software distribution is not a simple thing at scale. Security, making sure that you can actually show back that you are patching and compliant with all the endpoints that you are managing as a part of that or allowing access to your applications from. And then not breaking them and blowing them up, right? That's important too. So the ability to test that when you roll out updates, that everything is going to go seamlessly for your folks. And the beautiful part about this is really Workspace One just gives you a centralized console. And we more often than not recommend the consumption of Workspace One in a SaaS model. So just like Salesforce or Office 365, you would navigate to a web page. And there would be, an agent that would be on these devices that would phone home, pull down configurations, pull down applications, run any of the compliance and metrics and reporting. And some devices have rules about what they can and cannot, gather. If you want to do extra credit or reading on that from an iOS perspective, you can look up what can be done in supervised mode versus non-supervised mode, which basically is the way of saying Apple just said, hey, we only want to give you so much control for just installing an agent. Now, if you image the device, sure, then we'll give you more control. But just installing an agent, we're only going to give you this much control. So for extra credit, you can read through that. But the idea here is that I have a single pane of management for all those devices. I can pull reporting on how patched I am across all my relative devices and operating systems, which is very, very powerful. And again, we can simplify management across all modern operating systems, which is very, very cool. You know, I think this is a great point of app and desktop virtualization. It's just critical. De-risking mission critical desktops is one of the highest use cases I see. Folks that say this computer cannot go down. This computer on the line from a manufacturing perspective cannot go down. These computers cannot go down in a classroom. These lab computers need to be up. And when you have folks that are using individual workstations, the problem is that those can take some time to actually get repaired and put back together, especially if, like we were talking about before, they're treated like pets. So, and as we look at on the left-hand side, a system of record for mobile application users as well. If folks are just using, you know, whatever they want on any device they have, you have no record of, you know, what applications are there. And if you want to run a Windows-based application or something like that on a Mac or on an Android phone or on an iOS device, you're kind of out of luck. So oftentimes we'll say one of the first ways of abstracting things back into the data center and abstracting that control away from folks is by creating those remote applications and remote desktops that can be accessed as a part of a virtual desktop project. And that's a great way to get started. And as we were looking at sort of the 3 go forwards, that was really one of the ones where we sit down and have an earnest and honest conversation saying, what's going to bring you the most bang for the buck? Maybe unified endpoint management is, you know, year 2, and year 1 is going to be your improvement for delivery of Windows applications and everything else. Sorry, just getting a drink there. So as we look, we can transform Windows delivery with virtualization as well. When we look at presenting applications remotely, we can access them from anywhere. We can access Windows apps from any device. We can keep Windows app data off of devices and unauthorized devices off the network if we really want, and control it just as far as we want. And we can separate operating systems from apps with just-in-time automation. And VDI can still be complex. I can certainly sing this song of saying that I have been a part of many design engagements for virtual desktop environments where we've seen RDSH apps, virtual desktops provide a lot of complexity. And especially when you start looking at highly available solutions, now you have to start walking down all the dependencies for an entire environment. And it can be incredibly complex. You still have to operate Windows as a service. And this comes back to the point that we talked about previously, where we're saying, hey, if you're engaging in a virtual desktop project, the most important thing is you're not running Windows for the sake of running Windows. I don't think anybody would do that. That doesn't sound like fun at all. You're in Windows for the application that you're going to be using on top of it. So if you're operating that as a service, you're basically saying, hey, the service that I'm establishing for you, my customer, is an application that happens to be using VMware Horizon and Microsoft and whatever might be under the hood. And as we look at how we can manage that, this concept of just-in-time management is something that's come about in the past 2 years, where the idea is just-in-time management really allows you to basically click on a resource for a user in the exact moment that they need it with a fantastic user experience. And as we look at how we can actually deliver just-in-time management, the experience for that is, oh, we've got a couple users that, we didn't plan for. We missed them on the HR hire list or whatever, and we really need to get them going today. No problem. Just have them sign in. And once they sign in, desktops and applications can be provisioned for them automatically, instantly in the background. And what powers that technology for anybody that's worrying about the nerd knobs is a technology called instant clones, which is, we could geek out at that at a later time, but what it basically brings you is the ability to clone a virtual machine 1 VM per second and have it running and join to Active Directory for users to log into. And it's incredibly powerful from a provisioning perspective to allow folks to say, we can change the way we do business if we can deliver Windows as a service and magically snap things into air at 1 second per desktop. So I'd challenge anybody out there that thinks that they can image 1 desktop per second themselves from a physical standpoint to to show me how that's going to happen in a meaningful fashion, because I'm excited to see that. So I wanted to talk quickly about a use case that we as AdvizeX have worked on, and it was actually using Virtual Desktop to reinvent desktop as a service for a public school system. And the big issue that they had was the time to reconfigure computers after summer cleaning was incredibly difficult. They'd end up with computers that wouldn't get plugged back in, and it would generate, hundreds of calls that would be filtered through when school opened. Basically, for the first month and a half of school opening, they were still tackling issues. And customer support lacked, as well as students had to physically come to school to use some applications that were available in the lab. So the problem that they had were there was an inflexible and poor experience in the lab. They had classroom desktops that averaged weeks to repair. So in other words, the teacher calls and says, hey, this computer's broken. I really need someone to come down and fix it. It would take them weeks, which is terrible. And an inability to manage upgrades for desktops without large capital expenditures. And what this meant is they would buy some computers, let them sit for 4 years, and then find out that they weren't supported for the next version of the operating system. So they would say, well, this is a huge problem. Like, how can we solve this? So AdvizeX worked with them to deliver a digital workspace solution for more than 16,000 of their users, both staff and students. And we focused on applications and delivery to any device, as well as thin clients in the classrooms and in the labs. And what some of the interesting outcomes from this was, we saw a 4x IT productivity improvement on the yearly teardown and setup of classrooms, simply because by reducing the complexity of the computers, they were basically able to look at the back of it and say, hey, even a teacher can probably do this, because you basically plug in power, keyboard, mouse, network, out. It just works, right? I just turn it on, and I don't have to set up any software. I don't have to do anything. I can literally take a new client out of the box and set it up, and it's going to work just fine. So it reduced their setup and teardown activities. It also reduced the total cost per desktop by 40%. And the rationale behind this was because they were able to reduce the cost of CapEx on the thin clients themselves that they were using, along with Microsoft costs for overall licenses by going to concurrent usage for some of their Windows-based licensing. They provided increased desktop availability throughout the school year. They had a higher satisfaction rate for folks that said, hey, yeah, that was, that actually worked really well to say we want to have applications that are available, all the time, and I can quickly access my applications if for some reason I can't from one location. And then one of the final outcomes was the ability to provide students with remote access to any application on any device. Where this really came into play was students that really only had access to like an iPad or something like that, but they needed to do, some critical math functions or some higher ed applications, things like that. And they weren't able to do that because they only had an iPad. And as a part of that, they were able to actually access those Windows devices, those Windows applications from an iPad and use them to get the schoolwork done, not having to come to the school, which was a big win for the school system. So why start today? Why start today when we look at the 3 reasons for why you might look at, transforming Windows as a service, unifying your device management, and unifying app access? The simple version is we're at AdvizeX, we have this mantra of modernize, automate, and transform. And a lot of this is modernization. Transformation at the very top is that concept of saying, I'm changing the business from the inside out. The example that I like to use is the haircut example. Why do I go to Best Cuts? I don't have a salon. My wife has, a salon person, right? That's just not me. So I just go to Best Cuts. Why do I go to Best Cuts? Because I can sign in on my phone. I know exactly when I'm going to need to be there. I know exactly how long the line is before I get there. So I'm like, I'm just going to go to Best Cuts. That's transformation that's actually led by IT. And it's unbelievable. So the concept there of saying like, well, hey, can IT actually lead some transformation? Yeah, sometimes it can. But in order to get there, in order to be able to develop an application like that to move forward, to be able to publish that, to test it, to get everything going, you have to modernize, and you have to be able to automate and iterate faster than your competition. So as a part of that, we look at this from an endpoint perspective as well and say that the same concept applies here. That we need to modernize the platforms and our management capabilities to the point where we're just saying, what do we really care about here? And move forward and pursue those things. Then we need to automate and say, hey, can we automate remediation of things? Can we automate the dumb stuff that we just don't care about and isn't providing high value to the business? Keeping stuff running, what can we automate? And then transforming the business can come out of that then afterwards. Apologies, I'm just getting a drink there. So the last section I have for you today is, why should I consider working with AdvizeX when I'm engaging on a VMware project or a digital workspace project or something like that? And there's a lot of reasons. And one of the big ones is VMware is one of our strategic software partners. We are at the core automation, virtualization, storage, networking professionals. And as a part of that, we carry an average of 15 years of field experience. It's not just me that's a VCDX here at AdvizeX. We have 3 VCDXs right now and 2 candidates that are coming through the program right now, working towards the achievement of that certification. The total number of certifications we have is somewhat staggering here. These lead us to accreditations with VMware. That we have 4 VCDXs, 47 advanced level certifications, 63 VTSPs, and 100 VSPs on staff. And what this really means is it got us all 4 Master Services Competencies with VMware, which requires advancing. And as a bonus, my face got put on the website. How cool is that, right? I was really actually kind of shocked when that happened. It was just kind of fun. But as we look at this, what this really means is we're aligned with VMware and their technologies. We're trained on them. We understand how they work. We understand what is ready and what maybe needs a few more minutes to bake, right? And we can actually, as a trusted advisor for you, can help make that call together. And finally, VMware's agreed that we're the best. Every year since 2014, we have had some kind of award from a professional services standpoint on, from the SDDC Partner of the Year in 2014, Elite Professional Services 2015, 2016, and then in 2017, we're America's Digital Workspace Partner of the Year. So as we look at this, we can really see that at AdvizeX, we're a company of technologists. And if you ask D.R. Howdyshell, our president, what really sets us apart from our competition, it's the technologists that we have on staff. It's the folks that say, hey, we're going to look at our partners, sternly and lovingly and say, hey, we think that this is great. Or, hey, we think that this is, something that needs a few more minutes, or this doesn't meet these requirements, or this is a great use case for this application of technology. And we are willing to say, hey, we are so sold out on the fact that we need customers for life. And when we say that, what we really mean is we want to be that force field for you guys. We want to be the person that says we want to go along in the trenches with you and fight the fight and make sure that what you are doing from a technology perspective is getting you to modernization, is getting you to eventually automating the stuff that you don't need to be wasting time on. And eventually, it's getting you to the point where you can transform the business. And with that, that's all I've got for today's webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If there's any questions, you can go ahead and ask them in the Q&A panel, and I'll be hanging out for just a second. All right, thanks, everyone. All right, and it seems like there's no questions out there, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Everyone have a great rest of the week.